A word of warning, this is a very, very strong recipe. I think on the streets they say it's some really strong shit.
Virgin lines.
But I make absolutely no apologies. That is my style and this is my recipe and that's how I do it. There's nothing worse than having a broth with no taste. And that's when you start grabbing for the fish sauce and the hoisin and the sriracha to try and even rescue it.
One person can do compressions while the other does rescue breathing.
A lot of people have been asking for a home style pho recipe that they can follow. And I'm finally gonna deliver on that promise. But first, you'll notice I've got all my ingredients behind me because it is 2:24 Friday afternoon and I've got to cook a real batch of pho for tonight's dinner service. And since I'm here, I may as well cook a smaller version in this pot. And you'll notice beside me, I've got a blank piece of cardboard and a Sharpie. So what's gonna happen, by the end of this video, we're gonna have a home style recipe. For the purpose of today, I just wanna get a simple baseline recipe up. So without much further ado, let's get into today's video. The wait is finally over because in my hand, I've got what you've been waiting for. I just want to start off by saying if this pho recipe could talk to all the others out there, it would say...
It's unbelievable. Who put the fucking cameras in this place? Oh, who the fuck are you? I'm the guy who does his job. You must be the other guy.
That's right, not only does this recipe work, it tastes great too. And I ended up selling it to actual customers at my store. And in this video, I wanted to share with you this recipe. Hey guys, my name is Leighton and a very warm welcome to those joining the channel for the very first time. If you're new here, gee, you're lucky because some people have been waiting almost a year since I started this channel for me to deliver a recipe. So the way I filmed this video was at the store. I filmed it in a vlogging style format. And now in post, a couple of weeks later, I'm gonna jump in and out and fill in some gaps to give you guys some more detail. And a word of warning, this video is long, but then again, my shortest videos are about 15 minutes. So this is like a James Cameron's Titanic in comparison. But I make absolutely no apologies because from what you tell me, all the internet pho recipes out there suck.
You suck!
They kind of leave you disappointed, but not this one. So by the end, if you watch this from start to finish, what you'll get is a recipe that's actually gonna work. You're gonna get a lot of compliments for your pho, and you're just gonna be a lot more knowledgeable because I'm gonna introduce you to the way that I think, which is completely different from everyone else. Let's get started. I made this as a joke, but it ended up being so good, I sold it to real customers at my store. And I've just finished this batch and I'm very happy with it. So just to prove how good it is, I'm gonna serve it to a real customer tonight. We've got a real order. We're gonna test run this batch of pho, which I've just made. Now, considering I charge the most expensive prices in Brisbane for a bowl, and none of my customers knew the difference. That goes to show how good this recipe is. But if you need further proof, that there is my signature. And whenever I sign off on any of my recipes, you know it's legit. When I say I made this as a joke, what I meant is it was only meant to be revision 1. It wasn't meant to taste this good. At the time of filming this video, the iPhone 13 has been out for a couple of months, but if you imagine for a moment Apple's first iPhone, the iPhone 1, imagine back then they went straight to the 13. Apple would be doing themselves a disservice. But that's sort of what happened here. I honestly wasn't gonna make it taste so good until probably the 3rd or 4th revision or video. I was gonna breadcrumb it. So I thought I'd come clean on that. But I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, bro, you do this every day. Of course it's gonna taste good. See, here's the thing. This recipe is a simplified version of how I normally do it at the store. It's only got a fraction of the ingredients, but it ended up tasting pretty much on par with my version at the store. So it got me thinking. I started to question how I've been doing it all these years. And it's almost like I'm a pretty straight guy. I love my women. But even then I start to question myself every time I watch a Tom Cruise movie.
You complete me.
Hang day. The name of this recipe originally was a home style recipe, but as we know, it is not. It is a restaurant style pho recipe. But even then, that's not correct either. And just looking at the word style, whenever you read restaurant style, it's like you're trying to imitate or mimic what you get at a restaurant. But having proven this at a restaurant level, we need to cross out the word style and change it to quality, which gives it the name restaurant quality pho recipe that you can cook at home, revision 1. The technical name for this recipe is the 1-to-1 UC pho recipe using the blend method. Gee, I got a headache just even reading that. Before I became a chef, I was a civil engineer. Got a pretty technical background. And the 1-to-1 just means this recipe is a pure recipe. It is not diluted down with water, which means whenever you have a product that isn't cut down, it's concentrated, right? Well, the UC stands for ultra concentrated. And the next word that you need to pay attention to is the blend method, which is the method that I use to cook my pho. So what is a pho? It's a soup, right? But if we really break it down even further, a pho is actually a 2-step or 2-stage process. A lot of people don't realize that when you're making a pho, you're essentially doing 2 things. You're taking beef bones, adding water, time and heat to turn it into a bone broth. And then the second half of making a pho is to turn this or blending it into a pho using the onion and ginger, spices, and finally adding in seasoning. And if you don't know what this is, it is Hat Nem. It is an essential part of the pho making process, and you need this to make today's recipe. And I know a lot of books, a lot of internet recipes do not even mention this, but that is the missing link in this whole equation. So that is what a pho is. It's 2 steps in 1. And that's how every single recipe tells you to do it. I disagree though. I like to do step 1 separately. I like to make my bone broth on a day off. The blend method is something I made up. It's a made up word. It is a technique that I use. It's not written in any book or recipe. And the easiest way for you to imagine it is to picture a bartender. Say on a Saturday night you walk into a bar and you wanted a JD and cola. The bartender grabs a JD, pours a shot over ice and adds a cola and hands it to you. He doesn't go at the back and starts brewing or distilling that whiskey or bourbon, does he? And the same principles apply with the blend method. If I wanted to produce a pho, that bone concentrate is already done. The next thing I want to talk about is the bone broth. This is a 1-to-1 bone broth. That is the ultimate test of knowing how concentrated a broth is. This is a 24-hour 1-to-1 bone broth. I prepared it on a quiet day, and I find doing it this way is much easier for my workflow. Now, just to give you an idea of what 1-to-1 means, especially for those who it's been a while since high school maths, it is a 1-to-1 ratio, meaning I used 120 kilos of bones and produced 120 liters of broth. This then goes into the pan behind me, and in 3 hours it turns into a pho. So 24 plus 3 equals 27, which is why I market my pho as a 27-hour broth. So in a nutshell, that is what the whole pho making process is. But I like to break it up into 2 parts. I like to get the heavy lifting out of the way, because we all know when you make a pho, the part that is most painful and takes the longest is to simmer the bones, which is why I like to do it on a quiet day, because essentially all I need to do is set and forget. And then on a day that I want to blend it into a pho, I can do it in a matter of 3 hours. And I know a lot of people might be thinking, that's kind of counterintuitive. Why don't you do both steps on the same day and just get it out of the way? But for me and for my workflow, I find doing it this way is much easier. And I recommend for people, especially beginners who don't know what they're doing, just separate the 2 processes, get this part done correctly. This is like your building block. It is the foundation of your pho. Just get the heavy lifting out of the way, so that on a day that you want to turn it into a pho, it is not so daunting. Like today, giving you a live example, I got to turn this into a pho in a couple of hours for tonight's dinner service, and I'm not even breaking a sweat. I mean, can you imagine if I ran out of pho and I've got a couple of hours to do the whole process, including the beef bones? It's just not possible, and it adds so much stress. And for people at home who are time poor, you can always have this bone broth ready in your freezer, and on any given day or night, you can essentially blend it into a pho very, very quickly. And that is what we're about to do now. This is beef fat. I collect it every time I'm making my 24-hour bone broth concentrate. And what I like to do, I drop it into the pan, I sear off my brisket before starting my batch of pho. What I like to do on the day before, I season it lightly with a bit of salt, I sear it in the oven, and then today I'm searing it again in the pan with beef fat. And this gives it a really nice color, but it also adds to the overall color of your pho broth, making it a bit darker and much richer. The next thing I want to talk about is the onion and ginger. This is an extreme example. I don't think anyone does it my way, which is grilling it in the oven first and then over charcoal, which gives you this nice color. The aim of char grilling your onion and ginger is to give it color. Now, on all the pho reviews that I've done to date, all the pho broths vary in color. And sometimes when I look at a pho broth and it's very flat, I can already tell that they didn't even bother char grilling or even roasting the onion or ginger first. They pretty much straight boiled it, which gives it a very just flat looking broth. So my recommendation, at the very least, try and grill your onion and ginger in an oven, because pretty much every household has an oven now. And excuse me guys if I'm going too quick or too slow. I'm essentially doing this completely off the top of my head. I have not scripted anything. You can see there are no teleprompters. So if you have any questions or comments, just drop them below and we can always come back to this in another video where I explain it in more detail. And excuse me, this part's about to get loud. So now I'm going to add the bone broth into the pan. Alright, let's vlog this. Essentially that is what pho making is, because in 3 hours that's going to be a real batch of pho for real customers tonight. Okay, 3 hours later this has turned into a pho, and the last thing I'm going to do is adjust the seasoning and then it's ready to come out. And the same principles will apply when we do this home style version in a minute. But I wanted you to see it at a commercial level and in the real world, how fast and easy pho making really is. Because if you really break it down, it is turning a bone broth into a pho using onion and ginger, spices and seasoning. That's pretty much all it is. It is not rocket science. So how did I come up with this blend method? Well, the truth is, when I started this store 4 years ago, Pho Q, I wasn't really good at soups. It was something Mum did. My first, I think 50 batches of pho, they were horrible. And I really struggled to get the taste right. And chances are, if you're on this channel and you're watching this video, you're going through the same struggle as well. Just to give you an example, this is one of my many recipe books, and I just kept doing it again and again and again, one after the other, just trial and error. So the story was, that day I was making a batch of pho. I'd spent all this time making it, I think half a day, and it'd take me hours to prepare, but only seconds to ruin when I seasoned it incorrectly. And it's basically game over, because I had to do it all over again from the very start the next day.
Game over, man. It's game over.
I was really frustrated. I thought there's got to be a better way. And that's when I thought, why don't I break it down? Why don't I try and do the bone broth as best I could? I ended up doing these really big runs of bone broth in the 311 behind me. I filled up the 311 with as much bones as I could, and by the end I ended up with 12 pails of beef bone concentrate. Essentially what these pails allowed me to do was to have some continues up my sleeve. So it didn't matter whether I stuffed up the first or second batch of pho that day, I could just take out another one and press that continue button. It's almost like a video game. To explain this next part, I'm going to use the analogy of some dollar coins. Back when I was little, Street Fighter 1 came out, and down the road we had a milk bar that had the arcade machine. So me and my friend, we'd walk down, put a dollar coin in, and usually we'd make it to, I think, Saget, but we'd always lose. We couldn't make it to M. Bison. So we'd walk home really disappointed. Now, if you imagine I came back the next day, instead of just bringing along one $1 coin, I brought 12 $1 coins, so that if I lost, I could just put another dollar coin in and press that continue button. So essentially this method, having 12 pails of beef bone concentrate, allowed me to have some coins up my sleeve, so that if I fucked up my pho, I can just press that continue button. And eventually I stuck to this method because I found it is so much quicker to do, which allows me to have more time to do better things, like have a YouTube channel. So on that note, the one and only prerequisite for this video that you need to do some homework on first is you need a 24-hour 1-to-1 bone broth. It's written there, you need 2.5 liters worth of gort. If you have anything less than this, if you have a 12-hour or 6-hour bone broth, I can't guarantee you that it's gonna work. On that note, I've got to go to work, but I'll come back later tonight after service and finish this video. Since I'm here at work, I may as well run you through the workflow that I use to cook this recipe. And the principles that I apply in this home recipe is very much similar to how I do it at a commercial level, except when it comes to the seasoning. So I'm going to run through how I did it. And firstly, I used a 14-litre stock pot. This one I got from IKEA. It is really good because it is cheap. And most importantly, I can use it on my induction cooker. At the very first step, I got some brown onions and ginger, just cut them in half and put them on a baking tray. The next thing I did was I got a piece of brisket, I think it was about 1 kilo. I seasoned it, put it on a tray again, and I threw them both into the oven at the same time. And I think next door we're about to do the same. So let's go over and have a look. Perfect timing too, because this brisket is about to go in the oven. Next, I grabbed some beef fat. I put that into the pot, and again I sear off my brisket just to give it even more color. Take it out, put the onion and ginger in. For adding in the spices. So we're almost like shallow frying it just to get all that flavor into the fat. After that, I put in the brisket again, and then the most important part is I grab that beef bone concentrate On this occasion, I grabbed 2.5 liters worth and I pretty much deglazed the pot with it. Got a lot of ingredients behind me ready to go into our pot of pho, which brings us to the most important part out of the entire pho making process, which is how to season your pot of pho. Okay, so when it comes to seasoning a pho, this is like the main event. This is why you're watching this video. And this is the reason why customers come far and wide for my pho, because of my sense of taste. This here. And that is why the dining area out here is packed. And this is actually the make or break, because how you put in the ingredients determines whether it's going to taste good or bad. And we've all been there. We've spent hours to get to this point, and it only takes seconds to ruin the entire pot. So I'm going to guide you through how I would season my Noi pho. And what you need to know is there are what I like to call 3 stages of seasoning your pot. All right, so 3 stages of seasoning. The first is the pre-seasoning. This is where you add in the initial ingredients right at the very start. And this is the most important part out of the entire pho making process. For the pre-seasoning part, we're gonna add in rock sugar, Hat Nem, and rock salt right at the very start. You don't save it to the very end, because that is the biggest mistake I see a lot of people do. And in fact, it is happening right now in this kitchen. And I don't mean to, I don't mean any disrespect to mum or how she does it, but this is a great example and I'll show you. So the pho in this store is made in a very typical 150 litre stock pot, and that's been going for a couple of hours, but mum hasn't seasoned that whatsoever. She's going to wait until tomorrow afternoon to put in all that seasoning right at the very end. So, a bit of a side story. Back in high school, my school had this thing called a talent quest. It was the equivalent of American Idol or Australia's Got Talent, and it was held every year. But in order to make it to the finals and perform in front of the entire school assembly, you had to go through the heats or the trials. So this was back in 2000, and Metallica and Limp Bizkit were the shit. And every schoolboy wanted to form a rock band because everyone wanted to be a rock star.
So you wanna be a rock superstar?
So anyway, this music period, my teacher had to judge these so-called talents, and we sat in the hall as if we were a real audience, and this band got up to play, and I remember me and my friends, we looked at each other and we just laughed. Bro, check out these jokers. Actually, I should call them a garage band. They got up and they just kept apologizing, and whenever you got someone who keeps on apologizing and starting the song all over again, you know they have not practiced. It sounded like they rehearsed for the very first time 5 minutes in the hallway before getting up on stage. So no one knew each other. Now, fast forward to the finals, we had an actual band that got in, and they performed the song. And I still remember this because if you imagine for a moment, I went to a very strict all-boys Catholic school, and they were playing this song. And the entire school, all the boys were moshing to this song. Meanwhile, all the teachers, they could not believe what they're hearing. It was like blasphemy. Their jaws were just on the floor. Now, if you're one of those people who adds this seasoning in right at the very end, this blast chiller. Now, my point is, if you're one of those people who adds in the seasoning right at the very end, 5 minutes before serving it, and expect everything to come together, you're doing it wrong. But if you add those initial ingredients in at the very start, during that 3 hours, all the seasoning and ingredients has a chance to rehearse, go over each other's houses and jam, and basically get to know one another, which develops this intense flavor that you're chasing. In other words, you'll get a much better result. The second stage of seasoning is called the final adjustment, and this is where you add in the fish sauce. Obviously this is a commercial quantity, and you add in the white sugar, and always add in the fish sauce at the end. And basically at this point, before you even add these two ingredients in, if you've done your pre-seasoning correct, your broth taste should be about 90% correct. And what we're doing here is trying to correct it to 100%. So what the heck did I put in this pho to make it taste so good? That is the burning question. Well, you'd be shocked to find there are only 3 simple ingredients. Now, at the start of every batch, I add in salt. I added in 1 tablespoon of rock salt, followed by another 3 teaspoons. What I find is a lot of recipes out there don't tell you to put enough salt in. It's like they're terrified of it. But what I'm saying is don't be afraid. And my challenge to you is add it in that order. And each time you add it in, have a quick taste to see how it changes the profile of your broth. I then added in 1 tablespoon of Hat Nem, followed by another teaspoon, and finally 75 grams of rock sugar. This then completes our pre-seasoning stage, and even though this was right at the very beginning, I had a quick taste, and right there and then I knew this was going to be a great tasting pho. And I was so confident I even let Dun, our harshest critic, have a taste. Trên đường phải không?
Không, thế vị ok rồi anh, nhưng mà nó hơi mỡ.
Chưa xong. Trên đường phải không?
Yep.
At the end of 3 hours leads us to the final adjustment stage, and I added in 1 tablespoon of fish sauce, followed by a teaspoon. And normally I would add in white sugar just for a minor correction, but on this occasion I found I didn't need to because it was really sweet enough. And this FSL, it's just an old habit of mine when I was an engineer. FSL stands for finished surface level, and whenever we built something like a bridge or a footpath or whatever on the drawings, you'd always have FSL to know the height that you're working to. So here I wrote 3 liters, which is our target volume. And we started off with 2.5 liters. I had to add in another 500 mils of beef bone concentrate or gort to get it back up to 3 liters. And at this stage, I was quite happy with the recipe that I served it to a customer that night, which was a Saturday. But the next day, I had a quick taste and I found it was still too strong. That's when I had to just dial it back with half a litre of water. A word of warning, this is a very, very strong recipe. I make absolutely no apologies. That is my style and this is my recipe and that's how I do it. Because I find there's nothing worse than having a broth with no taste. But the problem you have here is if you find it too intense, all you got to do is add some water to dial it back down. So my recommendation is if you find this too intense, just add a cup of water until you find the point where you're happy with it. There's this phrase in Vietnamese, ngọt từ xương, which means sweetness from the bones. And the reason I brought it up is I felt as though I put way too much rock sugar in this recipe. Yeah, 75 grams was too much and it made the broth just too sweet. And that's my one and only regret for this recipe. And if I could do it all over again, I would have put in half that amount. Because remember, we can always bring it back up during the final adjustment using white sugar. The third stage of seasoning is called boosting. This is where you add in MSG right at the very end to elevate the taste of that broth. But you'll notice I completely skipped over it because I found there was absolutely no need to put it in. The broth tasted great already. I really struggled to finish this video. It is something I started 6 weeks ago, and so many things have happened during that time that I've stopped and started it that many times I've completely lost count. And that explains why there are so many different scenes. But the main thing, it's done, and I couldn't be happier with the results. In my hand, I have what I believe is one of the most honest representation of what a pho recipe should be. This is my gift to you. I've basically empowered you with the knowledge that I have so that you then can go cook a better pho for your friends and loved ones, which has always been the aim of this channel. I always knew this was going to be the video that really blew up this channel. And the reason it took so long to make is I've been kind of avoiding it all year. I knew eventually I was going to have to make it, and the truth is I'm just not that comfortable shooting tutorials. I found it difficult to explain some of the most basic things that I do each day, and that's what happens when you do things on autopilot. But it's done, and I've learnt so much from shooting this video, which will help me going forward deliver better content for you guys, which is more clear and concise. So if you found this video useful in any way, consider subscribing to this channel. Drop a comment if you have any. I'm sure there's going to be plenty, and I promise I'll never make a video this long ever again. My name's Leighton. I am the real Pho King, and I'll see you guys in my next video.